Hi, welcome to the year-end edition of SacTV.com's Riverside Chat. And normally it's at the American River, but today it's going to be a compilation of some interviews I did in Sacramento of radio personalities. These were interviews I did throughout the year, so we'll hear first from Dave Williams, who worked at KROY, a top 40 AM station back in the 70s. He also worked at KNDE, the competitor, and each time he was number one. And he eventually wound up in talk radio, first at KGNR, and then that had been KCRA TV's radio station, KCRA AM, but it flipped call letters and it moved to a all news format eventually after playing a mix of news and music. But he did a morning show there and advanced in the 80s. From there, he went to KFBK and did mornings and was number one for many years. And also at KFBK, Kitty O'Neill. I had a pretty long conversation with her about her career as the afternoon host on that station these days. And also, she's in a band that plays very cool alternative music. They do a mix of covers and originals, so we'll be checking that out. And finally, Pat Martin, who recently retired from the Eagle in Sacramento as the morning host. He had been on the KRXQ, the rock station. He had been on that for many years. And then he went to the Eagle and then retired, only to become an artist. And I think he's been working on it for a while, but we'll check out some of his art. So those are the three interviews I want to show for you. Three local interviews I did the past year. I just want to put them all together in one show. So once again, we'll be checking out Dave Williams, Kitty O'Neill, and Pat Martin. Hello, welcome to this podcast about the history of radio and music. With me today is Dave Williams, who has performed in so many different markets on radio, but we're going to focus on Sacramento because that's kind of where it all started for you, right, Dave?
Yeah, it's my hometown. So I was born there and I grew up there and actually spent the first 49 years of my life there.
Mm-hmm. So your actual first station, wasn't that in Yuba City?
Yeah, my first on-air job. That's
Mm-hmm.
the way it used to work, Alex. As you remember, it was like, if you're going to get into radio, you start off in a college station or a very small market. And then when you're ready to graduate, you get a job at a medium-sized city.
Now,
And then
Sacramento eventually became a major market, but at the time, was Sacramento still considered like a medium
yeah,
market?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And then if you're ready for a big time, then you move on from there. And that's a process that used to take years. And in the process of taking years, you learned a lot. These days, there are a lot of people entering radio, getting their first job in major markets. I really don't understand why that happens. I kind of do, but I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about it.
Has
I
to do
just
with
think that,
Craigslist.
pardon me?
Has to do with Craigslist.
Maybe so. I do think that a lot of people miss an awful lot of learning and development. It would be like taking a really good baseball player out of high school and putting him right in the big leagues. That occasionally happens, actually, but there's so much nuance to learning the art of performing radio and to learning programming and strategies and approaches and all that stuff, and you have to learn that by screwing up, which we all did in minor markets. So anyway, yeah, that's the way
So
it
you
used
came
to.
into radio in 69, 70 in the era when society was completely changing and radio was right there changing with it.
Right. Yeah, society was changing big time. I'm 72. I was born in 1951. My parents grew up in the 30s and 40s. Well, society was nothing like it is now. And even when I was a child, my mother was listening to your hit parade and, the music of the 50s, a little bit of doo-wop, but mostly things like, Patty Page and that kind of thing. So when I got into radio, when I got interested in radio in the early 60s, well, music was changing big time. Um, we had a lot of art, rhythm and blues that had never really been part of the mainstream,
Mhm.
pop radio and so
Even
forth.
before Motown.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And then, of course, along came surf bands, and then here come the Beatles and the whole English invasion and everything, and all of that developed on the back of a great deal of uh, concern and I think dis I don't want to say disgust. A lot of young people of my time were very much worried about the way things were going. For one thing, we had the war in Vietnam.
Mhm.
I graduated in 1969 from high school.
Mhm.
I know guys that went to that war and died and stayed there. I was 18 years old. I was facing the very real possibility of being sent 10,000 miles with a rifle into a rice paddy where I would die before I was old enough to fall in love,
Mhm.
before I was old enough to, have a vote for what was going on. So this was a big deal. It really was a big deal at the time, and it changed all of the culture musically. We got the San Francisco sound and all of that stuff. So I grew up in the middle of all that, and it was really exciting, and radio followed along and led the way in very exciting ways.
So talk about how KROY, where you started your top 40 medium market career, and then it blossomed into major markets.
Yeah,
At KROY, the format was, I guess, run by Johnny Hyde, called Music Power.
right.
It was a little bit different than Boss Radio. Explain the difference between Boss Radio, which was pretty popular in the mid 60s through late 60s, versus KROY.
KROY was a radio station that had its roots a little bit earlier than what you're talking about. Boss Radio, which
Mhm.
was the Bill Drake format that became so big in San Francisco and Los Angeles and Boston and other cities. The main difference was that because KROY started, it was from a little bit earlier in the popular music scene. Uh, we considered ourselves a personality station. The other stations just considered themselves music stations.
Mm.
And that was the mantra for them was more music, less talk. And that's what they gave you. And they did it
I kept
beautifully.
hearing that for decades.
Yeah. Yeah. And it was great. It was extremely successful.
Mhm.
But I felt really, really lucky because I was starting off in radio the way I listened to it, the way I learned it as a child. The disc jockeys. Look, I like music, but all the stations play essentially the same songs.
Mhm.
It's like, but it was the disc jockeys that made the difference. They were entertaining. They were exciting. They were funny. I and that's all I wanted to do. It's all I ever wanted to do, and so I managed to work my way into KROY, which was the station I grew up listening to back in the days of the late '60s into the '70s. They
Mhm.
were there on Arden Way. And they had that window that looked in from the sidewalk to where
I
the disc
remember that.
jockey was working. And I used to go out there, when I was in high school, go out there with my friends, and we'd stand out there for a couple of hours, just watch the disc jockey work and got the radio turned up. And then lo and behold, it wasn't that long after I graduated, I was on the other side of that window. I was sitting there with the controls and the microphone and the records, and it was just an absolute dream come true. And I can't say enough about my time at KROY. It, with the possible exception of personal matters like marriage and childbirth, it was the best thing that ever happened to me.
Now, did you have freedom? What type of freedom did you have at KROY?
Well, we had the freedom of choosing every other record. The records that we didn't choose were the current hits. They came up in various rotations depending upon how popular they were, how well they were selling, how much they were requested, and so forth. So that would be a stack of the top 10 were in a stack of 10 records. They were literally a stack of records. Next to that was another stack of records with little blue labels instead of red ones. And those were, the bubbling under kind of hits. And those didn't play as frequently as the red ones. But at KROY, what Johnny Hyde had established, as far as I know, had never been done anywhere. And I'm not sure that it ever has been since. And he had every other song was an older song, a
Okay.
rebound, we called them rebounds. And it could be a song that just fell off the charts 6 months ago, or it could be something that was 10 or 15 years old. And we had the freedom to choose those within some limits. And the limits were, if you were working a night shift, then you were allowed to play some album cuts, some
Okay.
heavier stuff, some longer cuts. And because
Were there restrictions on music at all? Like say with you're allowed to pick these certain songs, but did you have to keep in mind a certain flow of the music?
oh, absolutely. That's part of the craft that I was talking about. Of course, that's not necessary today, because today the people that play music, it's just all programmed into the computer and they play what comes up. But we did have choices. Now, we did have restrictions too. It was like I couldn't just grab a Steely Dan album and play any old cut off of that I wanted. I had to play the approved ones. So there was that limitation. But essentially that was it.
So in a way, it was like freeform radio, but you just didn't have complete freedom. You had to play the current hits.
It gave us an opportunity to express ourselves in terms of our own musical preferences. And you could hear the difference from one program to the next, depending on who was on the air. But but again, we were limited to approved songs, and we did that. And the fact of the matter is, most of us learned very quickly that we weren't there to play records for ourselves. We do that at home. So you learn, you get to know your audience, and you get to follow the rules. And next thing you know, you're sitting in a #1 radio station, and you're 18 years old.
That's right. KROY was #1 in Sacramento 12 plus, 1968 through 1973, and you were there most of those years.
And KROY only had 1,000 watts of power during the day, 250 at night. Now, we had a tremendous engineer named Don Trafton. He did more with that low power and rather the shaky quality of the signal. He did as much with it as the engineers at KFRC and KHJ. He made it loud, louder than it should have been. Although at night you were still lucky to get into Citrus Heights at all. But
it didn't cover the entire metro area.
No.
Yeah.
The metro pretty well. It covered the metro, but that's about it.
Now let's talk about KNDE, because that was a competitor to KROY, and you wound up at KNDE as a program director, and that was like 1974, 1975. So talk about that.
Yeah, KNDE, KNDE, came along about 1972, I believe. And I was sitting there at KROY, and we were playing the hits, and we were #1, and I was doing a morning show by then. And we just thought those guys at KNDE were just nuts. They didn't know what they were doing. And they were actually staffed and programmed by some very, very bright people. That station changed quite a bit over the next couple of years. They'd been beaten down a little bit, and the ownership decided, okay, the way we're doing this, they were kind of like, I want to make the comparison to KZAP at the time. KZAP was an all album oriented, total free form You know, you never knew what the disc jockeys were going to say or what they were going to play. There was like little to no format at all. And there was a big audience for that. So anyway, that's what KNDE was trying to do on AM. It just didn't really work out. So they finally changed back over to top 40 and decided to take KROY on head to head. And soon after that, I returned from Los Angeles and started working the afternoon shift there because KROY didn't have anything available for me.
You were at K Earth in Los Angeles, right? They were playing oldies at the time?
Yeah.
Okay.
Really old oldies, 50s stuff. And I would, it didn't do anything for me. But so at KNDE, I became program director rather soon after I started there doing the afternoon show. And we made some things happen, and we managed to beat KROY the first time in years. Yeah.
You know what strikes me is that period when you were there, and I was just a kid at the time. I was 12 years old in 1974. But that summer, KNDE had its van at the California State Fair at Cal Expo, and Gene Lane was, I was watching him do his show, and that's what got, but besides Casey Kasem, that's what made me want to get into radio, was watching him at the fair.
Yeah. What a goofball he is. I talked to him not that long ago, about 6 months ago or so, and he's still out there. He's still the space cowboy.
Yeah.
Yeah,
he does great Elvis impersonations.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He made a good living at it for years. He doesn't look anything like Elvis, although, he puts on the hair and all that and the suit and everything. But we had some wonderful people working at KROY. We had some really good jocks working at KNDE too. It's just that station just couldn't hold its head up long enough to become entrenched in the market, because
so did KROY just become ingrained in people's minds as the top 40 station in Sacramento?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, oh yeah, it was. Like I said, it became generational.
Hi, it's Alex Cosper, and with me today on SAC TV, in which we look at Sacramento as one of the greatest places to live, is Kitty O'Neill, a radio star here in Sacramento for many, many years at KFBK. That's 1530 AM and also 93 FM.
93.1 FM.
Yeah. And so more people listen to the AM than the FM, right?
They used to. I don't know what the difference is now, but a lot of people stream it. A lot of people on the app. It's kind of changed. But yeah, it was primarily on AM for a long time.
How about you? Is Sacramento your hometown?
Well, I consider it so, but I grew up all over the country. My dad was an Air Force officer. So we lived
all over.
Yeah, Hawaii, Philippines, Japan, and spent a lot of time back east. Pennsylvania, Northern Virginia, was at the Pentagon. So, kind of all over, but most of my life has been here. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So then from Sac State, you got into a band called Secret Service?
Yeah.
So
that's what I gave in my degree.
You've been a musician for how long?
Well, since the 80s. We started that band in the 80s after I graduated. And did stuff off and on. I mean, there was a few years when I really wasn't playing in a band, just trying to figure out what I was doing career-wise, but I always dabbled in music and played a little bit, with people here and there. But yeah, so it's kind of always been part of my life, some more intently at other times. So
Secret Service was like a new wave band, right?
Yes, definitely new wave. We played a lot of, like B-52s and Devo and some Pretenders, and
that's all my favorite stuff. Yeah, for that genre. Yeah.
And it was, we played that circuit, which was crazy, Alex. I mean, we played every night, like 5 nights.
Did you ever play at Lord Beaverbrook's?
Yeah.
Sure. Because you and Kurt have known Randy Perry Gary, the late Randy, since that period, right? The early 80s.
Yeah, and my husband was partners with him, at the
Right.
entry.
Still, he's still like the a part owner of that whole thing, like Gary's restaurant group,
Correct.
and that's like 7 or 8 restaurants here in town, something like that.
Yep. Hmm.
And he's the head chef, right?
Yep. Part owner, head chef, executive chef.
Okay.
Mhm.
So yeah, and he's guitarist for your band, right?
Yeah, and guitarist for my band.
That's a lot of stuff. Are you involved in the restaurant scene at all, or is that all him?
That's him, pretty much.
Okay.
Yeah.
But then you have time for band. Do any of his restaurants have stages like as a music venue?
Oh gosh. Well, used to play a little bit of Gary's outside on the patio, but they don't really have anything like that. I would say no, not now. Yeah.
Okay, but Lord Beaverbrooks, that was a happening place, right?
Yeah,
Back in the
for
early
sure.
80s. And that is now Gary's, right?
It was, and it's been oh, what is it now? It just flew out of my head. It's not Zinfandel Grill is what it is.
Oh, okay, right. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, is that the one on Fair Oaks
Fair-
Boulevard, or is that? Oh,
Yeah.
okay, so that's kind of near Cafe Bernardo's across the street, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it is
And
kind of.
that's next to Wildwood Kitchen and Bar, where I saw you last summer,
Yeah, yeah.
and
We
that was a great show, by the way. I really enjoyed that.
Thank you. Yeah, that's we've played there a number of times every year. So yeah, they're cool to do the local music thing, the brothers Matt Haynes and his brother.
Matt, I went to grade school with Matt, so that was
Did
my
you?
first time seeing him in like 3 or 4 decades
Uh,
at that show when I saw you there.
all right. Yeah. Yeah. He's doing a lot. He's doing a lot with the arts, with that rock and soul gallery,
Hmm.
Twisted Track, all that stuff downtown. Yeah, he's busy.
I'm glad there are people like him and Kurt that support the local scene,
Yeah.
in any way they can, because to me, local music has always been just a cool concept, even if there were like tons of bands I couldn't listen to because for whatever reason, I just didn't like them or whatever. But I still respected the fact they were getting up on stage, doing stuff for a crowd, and trying to make Sacramento a fun place to have local music.
Do you remember the features?
Yeah, I'm friends with Johnny Pride. Yeah,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
other members of the band. Yeah.
Yeah. I used to love those guys. I thought they were very cool. We played Oasis Ballroom a lot back in the day well, actually, I can't remember if I was in Indian Shelter or Secret Service, maybe both, but yeah, they used to play there a lot. I always enjoyed them.
That's where City Kid, which became
Yep.
Tesla, became a big thing. Um, so before we get too much into your music, Skyler's Pool, and you do kind of a mix of originals and covers, right?
Yeah, we prefer doing the originals, but when if you have to play for 3 hours and
Yeah.
you're doing both, we've tried to do more gigs, that are just a set or set and a half where we can just play all originals, and we've done that at Chalk It Up, or if we're on a bill with somebody else. But it's live gigs are hard these
Oh
days,
yeah, yeah.
and they want you for like 3 hours for the whole night.
And
So
it depends on the situation. Is it a dancing crowd? Is it a listening crowd? Is it a dinner crowd? That
right.
all plays into it, I think.
Are you a musician,
Yeah,
Alex?
I play guitar. I write songs. I have keyboards here. I'm not that great at keyboards, but I've played guitar since I was a kid.
Okay, well then you know what it's like.
And
Yeah.
I've done live gigs like at Harlow's and the Press Club and some of those other places downtown or
Sure.
midtown.
Yeah.
I think there's a cool scene in Sacramento, but again, before we get too much into that, let's talk about your
Yeah.
radio career a little bit here.
Sure.
I mean, that's how a lot of people know you,
I know.
doing the afternoon news show on KFBK from 4 to 7 p.m. You used to have a different shift on a different station, but same owner, I think. You were on KAER for a while.
First started there years ago. Oh my gosh, was that 80s or 90s
Yeah,
early?
that became Y92, but at
Uh-huh.
one time it was CARE.
Yeah.
And I had
KROY.
this printout from TV Times. I'll show a better version of it.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
you're on here,
What is?
and I'm on here too.
Oh my God,
I'll put a better version after I put this all produce this. But
that's
um,
hilarious.
what
Okay.
I noticed on here, this lists all the full-time radio people on here
Uh-huh.
for the week, and then it has weekenders on another column. But I did a little survey of my own. This is 1986,
Yeah.
and out of 77 people listed for
Yep.
full-timers in Sacramento
Yep.
on this thing, 10 were women. Okay,
Yeah.
you were one of them,
Yeah.
and you probably know about probably all the others, maybe. But I'm just curious, getting into radio at that time, like you started what in '84?
Oh yeah, I guess that would have been about right. Yeah. Yeah, you're right.
Okay, I started in Sacramento radio at '84 as well, and so did Rush Limbaugh, like December '84, I think. And you answered phones for him, or what exactly did you do for him?
Yeah, I was so I worked at both of those stations. I was the producer, they called it producer for the KFBK talk show, and whoever that happened to be in that slot. Well, it happened to be Rush Limbaugh at one point, and he came in, and so yeah, I worked with him for however long he
Wait,
was
first
here.
you worked for Morton Downey Jr. till he got fired, right?
You have done your homework. Yeah, I Downey Jr.
So
Absolutely.
both of those guys were two of the most controversial radio and TV people of all time, but of that era
Yeah.
particularly.
No,
They got rid of the
what is
fairness.
this I'm doing here?
I mean, the
Yeah.
FCC got rid of the fairness doctrine, and next thing you know, there were like shock jocks. There was like Howard Stern and Rush
Yeah.
Limbaugh and those kind of people. I'm just curious. Well, how did you feel about that? Getting into that when, say, like when I got into radio, they taught me everything that those guys broke. That they broke the rules of what I was taught, and I was taught don't talk about politics or religion, and don't insult your audience, and blah blah blah. And then these guys come in and they're doing that, and they're making more money than I'll ever see in my life. And that was the way to win in radio, apparently, starting with those guys. I mean, how did you fit into that? What was your mindset?
Well, I had studied communications at Sac State, but I didn't study, being on the air on radio. So I really didn't have any kind of preconceived ideas about what that was supposed to be like. I was, more into content and, verbal expression and that kind of thing. I mean, I didn't know the rules of radio. So when those guys came in, man, I thought this is crazy. These
Well, it was
guys, the
kind
hook.
of wild compared to everything else on the dial, right?
Totally. I mean, on that station on KFBK, as I recall, it was like Sally, Jesse, Raphael,
Yeah.
and
Was that
oh, and
syndicated?
Larry King. Yeah, and Larry
Yeah.
King. Because those guys, and so I thought, oh, all right, yeah, let's interview guys. And then we had Morton Downey Jr., who just kind of just went off, on people, and
Yeah.
hey, this is weird. And then, but I said, I guess this is how they do it, So then Rush Limbaugh comes in, and he was even more unique than Morton Downey Jr. I mean, he did all kinds of things. You talk about breaking rules, Alex, like he'd have paper and he goes, I have a piece of paper here, and like making the sound effect, and it
Yeah.
was, you weren't supposed to do. And then someone would come in the room and he'd go, hey, Linda, what are you doing? I mean, he talked people off, breaking all the rules of
Oh, yeah.
people that
Well,
I
the
mean,
audience becomes the third party.
exactly. Totally different. And so, because I was so young and inexperienced in radio, I thought it was kind of crazy, but I really didn't understand, I guess, at the time how unique it was. And
And as a producer, did you operate the board or answer phones, or what did you do?
I answered phones and, just took care of anything that he needed, commercial wise, or anything like that. I mean, the other people, like before Martin Downey would have guests, and so I would help facilitate that. But Rush didn't want any guests. Really? Well, like, you don't want
Because
guests?
it was his show.
He's like, nope, no guests. I'm like, well, okay.
I saw him in an interview. I don't want to talk about him all day. I want to talk about you, but just a few things about him. First of all, I didn't agree with any of his politics. I was way on the other side of the spectrum. But I learned one thing from him, and that is from an interview, he said, if you're going to put callers on the air, don't let them take over the show. It's your show. Did he ever tell you that?
Oh yeah, and he would tell me, sometimes I hate to say this, but if somebody like was like really old, or the accent was too thick and it was hard for people to understand, he'd say, maybe not. So I'd be like,
Still thinking of the audience. Can the audience hear this and know what's going on?
Yeah, I mean, that was what it was for. That was the reasoning behind it. I mean, you can read into that what you want, but frankly, it was because he'd say the callers, are part of the show, and they're tools for the show. That doesn't revolve around the caller, revolves around me. This is Rush speaking. And so, when you have a caller on, they're part of the show, but they just within their framework, like you said, they don't take over the show. They, have to be controlled. They have to be cut off at the right time. So, he had his whole vision of the kind of show he wanted. So that's, what I tried to do in my job.
Well, so Kitty, you mentioned how your band does covers and originals. Let's talk about the originals. What's your mindset in songwriting and the music you create?
Well, I don't write a lot of love songs. Some of them I've tried to write about bigger topics, relationships, of course, but just how we fit in the world sometimes, and not primarily romantic, but sometimes be hopeful. Usually, I try to have some.
That's what I get from your song, like California or the Sunflowers. Really optimistic, positive vibe I get from that.
Yeah, thanks. Well, that's what I try to do. I mean, that's how I am as a person. So I try to, kind of have that reflected through music and lyric. So yeah, that's, it's observational. Some of it's personal. But I hope it's relatable.
Well, do you write with your husband, Kurt?
Yeah. Yeah, I write the lyrics and some of the music and melody. He does a lot of the chording and arranging. So it's a project we do together.
His guitar work reminds me of like U2 or Echo and the Bunnymen, like really cool 80s music is what it reminds me of.
He also plays in a U2 cover band. He plays he does the edge parts, and that's always how he's played. And he doesn't overplay. He tries to keep it tasty but important. But yeah, I think he'd take that as a huge compliment.
Let's talk about your songs. You have an album out, right? And it has 10 tracks on it.
We have we have some EPs and some singles. Our last releases, we decided to just drop like singles, like once a month. And it's changed, Alex. When we were doing music back in the day, you put out albums and stuff, and it's everybody downloads everything now. So we thought we would just try that. So we've just been releasing singles over the last summer.
So now you probably write songs one at a time, as opposed to planning out an album and a theme that makes all the songs fit the theme.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's a way to do it. But it's just not how we've been doing it lately. Yeah.
Great. So we're going to wrap it up here in a minute. But what can you tell us about the future of Skyler's Pool? What's your plans with the group?
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, our dear drummer is having some health problems that probably are not going to be resolved in the near future. So we are going to have to regroup a bit, literally, and get a new member, which is always hard because we've been
Is that
together.
Fred Nelson Jr.?
Yeah.
Yeah, I know him. I know. He's done a lot of stuff here in town. So,
Oh, yeah, and he plays those electric drums, which I love because I mean I grew up with the acoustic, but man, he just kept everything real tight and in line with those. But yeah, so he's a big contributor to the songwriting, especially with his parts and beyond. Um, but as I said, he's encountered some issues, so we're going to have to find somebody else. And we've been together 8 years. We had a different drummer for about a year and a half, 2 years, but we've been together in that band for about over six. So it's going to be different, but we're going to do it and move forward. And we come out with some new stuff.
has it?
It's time to get out of this place. I'm gonna go far away than I've ever been. 'Cause I need to see, need to know if I can almost outrun what I was used to be. Unleash a thunder inside telling me I can be free. I know where I wanna go, take it slow, spending my hours right in between yellow and green. All the sunflowers, the sunflowers, yellow and green, the sunflowers, the sunflowers.
Hey, it's Alex Cosper with SacTV.com and PlaylistResearch.com. With me today, one of the most legendary radio personalities in Sacramento history, Pat Martin.
Wow, thank you. That's very kind of you.
Well, I'm being honest because you hold the record still, right?
I
For
still hold the record
longest time in one time slot at the same station.
with no changes.
Right, and that's
Yep.
like, but you sat through different owners, right?
Several.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
so you survived the ownership changes, and there weren't any format changes. Were
No, never a format change.
there? Right. So that kind of helped stay in the same place, right?
Yeah.
And
it
so
helped
that
a
was
lot.
KRXQ 98 Rock, formerly 93 Rock,
Right.
back in the day, back when it challenged my station, Quad.
We had some epic battles, man.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was fun.
I remember the Sacramento Bee wrote about us. KRXQ, Quad, and the Zone, talking about how we all played kind of the same music at that time in '96.
Yeah, but you and I both know there were a lot of differences.
Yeah, there were a lot. The Zone was softer, and they were more female, and then we were like more alternative, and then KRXQ was more the active rock.
We played harder rock.
Yeah. And the more what I would call hair bands.
Right. We would play hair bands
Yeah.
and Metallica, and you
Right.
wouldn't touch that, right?
We didn't play. I played Metallica once in '96 when "Hero of the Day" came out. I thought it was a good song, so I thought I'd throw it on the air and ask the listeners what they thought.
And what they think.
We had live callers calling in, and a lot of them liked it, but most of them said, "No, you shouldn't be playing that."
Right.
They just said it's not really what we expect to hear on your station.
It's about expectations. I
Yeah.
agree. And that's the problem I have with some of these classic rock stations around the country that say they're classic rock,
Mm-hmm.
and yet they play Nirvana, Pearl Jam, Metallica,
Soundgarden,
Soundgarden,
Alice in Chains.
Collective Soul, even.
Yeah.
And those are great bands. They're older.
I wouldn't call them classic
I
rock.
wouldn't either.
Yeah.
That's the problem I have with this.
The reason is because classic rock, the actual format, all that stuff earned that title.
Yes, it's a body of work that established itself.
Right. Well, times change. Back then it was a lot more wild, I think. It seemed like rock and roll was a more wilder time back then.
Yeah, it was, definitely.
Like the 80s.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember one night the Scorpions came to San Diego, about 84, something like that. And they invited me to come down to the show and hang out with them backstage. And you just don't see this anymore. There was a party till dawn in these dressing rooms with girls, hookers, groupies, hanger-oners, radio dorks like me. And the manager comes in around midnight and says, "Guys, we have a tour stop tomorrow. You gotta get going." At 6 a.m., we finally rolled out of there. So that's back in the day. Yeah, it was like that. Not anymore. It's all business.
Now you're part of so much historical thing. Like you were at KMET in Los Angeles, and that to me is like the ultimate freeform station. I never really got to hear it except from air checks later on, but. Mm-hmm. Can you verify that was a very cool radio station?
Well, it was. Not when I worked there, but before I worked there.
Right, you were there at the tail end.
I was at the worst period in the history of the station, the end of the KMET era. But for many years, it was considered the biggest rock station in the world. It just had a certain vibe going. It had the right mix of personalities. They did pick their own music for the most part. I had my own parking spot, so they painted my name on the curb. I had my own.
Wow! And you were facing the Hollywood sign.
I was, so I would pull up there, and my car was looking right at the Hollywood sign, and it was really quite surreal to pull up there and having just pulled in right behind Tom Hanks or Sylvester Stallone or Bill Cosby, because we had to sign a clipboard when we came into the glassed guard booth there in Hollywood, and all the time I'd see Arnold Schwarzenegger, whatever, Anne Margaret, like celebrity in a Mercedes right in front of me. It was a crack.
Was it because it was near all this other Hollywood stuff?
Well, we're in Hollywood and we're in a television center, so they were doing some kind of TV taping of some kind, Yeah, but it was a really interesting gig, and you just see famous people everywhere.
And at that point, when you were working at KMET, did you get to say and play whatever you wanted?
Yes. Say for sure. Mm-hmm. Some set songs. We had sort of a loose system of music that we had to pick from.
You had to play some currents and then mix in your own.
Yes. But we had a lot of latitude, a lot of choice. KMET got washed out by the wave, and KGB actually took me back. So I was working there again. I was doing nights.
And from there you pivoted to Sacramento.
I pivoted to Sacramento. I had 3 job offers. I was looking for a new job. I had an offer at KSJO in San Jose.
Great.
This guy named Ken Anthony, who's currently doing afternoons on the Eagle, by the way. He was the PD at KSJO. And I sent him my tape and resume and talked to him on the phone. He called me back and he said, "Dude, I want to hire you. I want you to be my night guy. Can you hang on for like 2 months? Just hang on for like a couple of months. I got to make some moves, and I'll hire you." And I go, "Great, I'll take it." And then he got fired. About a month later, he got fired. So there went that gig.
That's radio.
That's radio.
Except you never got fired, right?
I got fired at KGB.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, the second time
that
I was there. Yeah.
But you weren't out long, right?
Oh, I wasn't out long. I was like 3 or 4 months.
Yeah.
Then I had a job offer to work at a station up in Seattle and also in Sacramento. And I got the offers the same day, the same exact day. The guy in Seattle called me. He goes, "Hey, man, I want to hire you. Will you take the job?" Sacramento called me and said, "Will you take the job?" So I chose Sacramento over Seattle. And I'm glad I did because that station went under.
Oh, right.
About
Right.
18 months later, that station went under. Yeah.
Whereas KRXQ just kept on getting stronger and stronger.
No, it did. So when I joined, it was in '88.
Okay.
And they were in this really crummy little corner of an office building. And the GM called me into his office and he said, listen, we're going to build a brand new, beautiful building. We're going to up the wattage of our transmitter. There's some big things happening. You're the missing piece of the puzzle. I really need you to work here. Big things are happening. And so I just felt really, wanted. I felt flattered by the guy. And everything he said was true. Everything. He built a new building. We got a new transmitter. And we kicked ass in the rating. We put KZAP out of
that
the
transmitter upgrade helped a lot, I think, because before it didn't cover all of Sacramento.
Right. No. We went from 8,000 watts to 23,000 watts. Mm-hmm. And then there was the transmitter swap in 1998.
Right, when the frequency changed from 93 to 98.
Yep.
Yeah.
Which ironically was KZAP's old
98.5 KZAP.
Yep. And
that would make some people wonder, well, why didn't you guys pick up the KZAP call letters?
They were all gone.
Yeah.
They're being used. But a lot of people confuse 98 Rock with, you guys used to be KZAP, right? No, we used to compete against KZAP, and we do.
Buried them, too.
We did. Well, and we do have their old transmitter. We're on their frequency, yeah. It was a really strange turn of events.
All right, Pat. So give us a tour of your art.
We'll do a real quick tour. I do geometric abstracts. Generally, I paint on wood panels. I generally paint in black and white. Occasionally I use some color, but this is a good example of one of my pieces. This one's called Organized Chaos. It's on a wood panel. It's 2 or 3 shades of black, believe it or not, which gives it a subliminal texture. But this is a good example of the kind of work I do. Geometric abstracts.
Let's look up a little up close look here. So you go through a process. You start off with doing it in pencil, right?
Yeah, I pencil a general shape or two in and then go from there. I think on this piece I started with this guy right here, this maze sort of thing, and it grew from there.
And you use special ink, right?
I do. Some of the paint I use it's called, it's the blackest paint in the world. It's from this guy named Stuart Semple. And it's the blackest paint. It's just so black. It's the blackest of all. Mm-hmm. It's blacker than black. And I use several shades and gives it a weird texture. It just comes to me. I let my mind wander. I try to use my inner creativity, and I try to create stuff that might be interesting to look at, that might conjure up a story within your own mind. My paintings mean whatever you want them to mean. And finally, we have sort of a living art exhibition because the lights change color. I have my lights programmed to change color. And this one's called Sphere. This is the only painting I've ever done on canvas.
Really?
So it's 18 by 18 on canvas. And it's another geometric abstract. You can see the colors changing. And people who come over to the house really seem to enjoy that. Because who doesn't love colors, Yeah. And it gives it a new personality every time it changes color.
Yeah, it reminds me of like a digital planet from a distant galaxy.
I like it. See, that's what I was talking about. Whatever you think it is, that's what it is. And I love that.
So there you have it. Some interviews I did earlier in the year with some radio pros that a lot of Sacramento people know. And thanks to them, I think those were 3 big highlights for my website, sactv.com this year. So once again, thanks to Dave Williams, Kitty O'Neill, and Pat Martin. And now for a final treat, in case you missed it last week, I want to include the song I've been working on for quite a few years. I don't want to say how many years, but it's been a long time that I've I put this song together in building blocks. And in December, I just spent a lot of time trying to record it, and in the process learned a lot about the recording process, which I had done in the past, but never with so much emphasis on details and understanding the process. So here's that song. It's called Time Tunnels.
Walking, I'm just walking down this winding hall, and I'm watching all the pictures displaying on the wall. Pictures of you and me and society. Time tunnels spin around in my mind. 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 Testing the limits of imagination and the boundaries of perception.